My name is Andrea Josiah, and I will be your moderator for this workshop. Before I start, I would like to kindly inform you that this session is recorded, just so you know, and that uh, this recording will be available um, as soon as the workshop is completed. I just want to start off by thanking the attendees for taking the time to join us. Most importantly, we would like to thank our presenter, Dr. Lorenzo David, for his effort in preparing and giving this presentation. Before we move on to the workshop, I would just like to speak a little bit about the RCD management system. And if you haven't heard of it or haven't come across it as yet, the RCD-MS system is basically here to streamline your research journey. And how you can access this is to log on to ULink, you navigate and click on the Services tab, and navigate and click on the RCDMS tab. And thereafter, you will register. There's two things to note here. You will have to register using your UJ email address. And secondly, you would need to have a soft copy of your proof of registration because that is one of the things that is required. You'd need to just upload it when you are registering. So before we introduce the presenter, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules and some important information. Okay, so if you have any questions during the presentation, please raise your virtual hand. I will then enable your mic and then alert to the presenter. Then you can thereafter ask your question. Or if you're feeling shy and you don't want to talk, you can also just type your question in the chat box. I will alert the presenter to your question. It is at this time that I will pause to ask Dr. David, would you prefer a more interactive session or would you prefer the questions at the end of the workshop? Dr. David?
Hi, sorry, I just broke up there for a minute. In terms of questions, I'm happy to take them as we go through the presentation. I think it'll be a bit more engaging that way, if that's okay.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Our second point to note is that the session is recorded, like I previously mentioned, and the recording and the slides will be requested. The slides will be requested from the presenter. Both the recording and the slides will be made available via the Moodle communities and on the RCDMS. And this should happen by the end of the week. Also, and more importantly, I will be posting a feedback survey in the chat. And this is basically to understand how this workshop has been helpful to you and how we can improve in the future. Also, by filling out the survey, it ensures that you receive a certificate of attendance. So I'm now going to be introducing our speaker, our presenter, Dr. Lorenzo David. He serves as a coordinator in the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg Postgraduate School. He holds a PhD in biochemistry from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Dr. David is dedicated to promoting student success by fostering both personal and academic growth through a learner-centered approach that emphasizes value-based learning. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. David.
Thank you, Ms. Josiah. And welcome, colleagues. I hope you all are well. I'd like to thank you for making the time to join us for today's session. If you can just get a thumbs up, please, from members of the audience, if you're able to hear me clearly, and I will begin sharing my slides now as well. Okay, I see there's a hand up, so I'm assuming that means that you can, oh, got some thumbs up. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm just going to share my slides. And one last question I have for you. Are you able to see the transitions? Maybe Dr. Gabriel, if you can assist me by just saying if you're able to follow the changes on the screen.
I can see
Okay.
the changes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes,
Okay.
Doc, we can see the changes.
Okay, perfect.
All
So
right.
once again, thank you for making the time to join us for today's workshop, the title of which is Proposal Writing and Submission Procedures. And this workshop is obviously targeted towards students within the Faculty of Science. So just as we go through a bit of the presentation, what are some of the key areas and key points we're going to be discussing? We're going to try and delve a bit deeper into understanding what a research proposal is and why it matters. I always feel that it's important for us, especially when we've got a difficult task in front of us, to have a clear understanding of what is it and why do we have to put this together. Thereafter, we're going to go a bit deeper and explore some of the key components of science proposals. And then we can examine the different writing phases when it comes to your proposal. Just to let you know, these phases that we speak of are not only applicable to your proposal, but they can be applied to when you're writing for your thesis, when you're writing for your journals. These are some general guidelines that have been developed by several members of the RCD team and obviously research quite well to kind of just guide you through the entire process. We're then going to go through identifying some of the common pitfalls and what are the solutions to these, as well as get some practical writing strategies. And there is going to be some time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. I generally like to keep my presentations relatively short, like under an hour. And I feel that with that, it just gives us enough time if there's questions that anyone may have regarding their writing, that we can hopefully address those sufficiently as well. So the first place to start at would be understanding a research proposal. And, when we come in, especially when we come in, let's say honors or masters or PhD, especially young earlier on, when we faced with this, it seems like a monumental task. And at first, it may seem like, why exactly do we have to put this together? I mean, my supervisor knows exactly what's going on and they've developed this project. So why do I need to put this proposal together? From personal experience, I feel that it's twofold. The first one is obviously our study needs to be in line with certain guidelines and has to be of a certain standard as per the University of Johannesburg and any university across South Africa as well. I think the second part of it, an advantage for us as students, is that it allows us to plan ahead our research, plan ahead what exactly is going to be involved in our study. And I think this is quite essential because sometimes if we just get into the research, and there's no clear direction, we can actually end up using a lot of time, wasting a lot of time, time that could either be better spent, be it in the lab or in the field, or even collecting data from various other sources. So in terms of the purpose of a research proposal, it's essentially a planning tool. And basically, it is meant to form sort of like a guide and a roadmap for your study itself. In this document, it will clarify what are your research goals, what is the scope of the study. Let's just say, as an example, and I'll use many examples from a background that I'm familiar with. Let's just say that we're speaking about cancer research and we're trying to come up with an alternative cancer therapy. Now, what is the scope of the research? Is it cancer generally, because we understand this encompasses various different types of cancers, or is it going to be more specific on one type of cancer? What is your specific area that you are going to be investigating? As well as what is the approach that you're going to be taking to it? What are some of the methods you're going to be using? What are the types of analysis that you're going to be doing? Outline of your of your chapters, shall we say? Then we also look at it also outlines the rationale as well as the significance of your study. And the primary aim of any of our research, and this is something I strongly believe in, be it from master's, PhD, or beyond, we don't just want to do a research a project just for the sake of doing it and getting a degree. I mean, obviously that's one of the benefits and one of the primary goals. But also we want our research to obviously have significance. We want it to possibly contribute to the body of science that exists currently in any way, shape, or form. So I think this document actually conceptualizes this and allows the readers and the examiners to actually understand better why are we undertaking this study. And obviously, we understand one of the primary focuses of your proposal would be to gain approval, from the university, from your department. Obviously, your supervisor will also fine tune in terms of what direction the study would go in. Uh, it's also used for you to get support and funding. If you're making certain funding applications, and obviously you would have to have a clear path or a clear framework in terms of this is a study that we're undertaking. This is what we hope to achieve. These are the aims. These are the objectives, how we're going to reach those aims, and, your research questions, etc. So it essentially is shall we say, an instruction manual or a guide, a map of your study itself, your broader study. So it's something that we actually, I always feel that the more time that we spend, or rather, if we put together a good research proposal, something that is well thought out, something that we're trying to preempt any possible issues we're having through our readings, it does make your actual study a bit simpler because you have an idea. Okay, after this, after I have, let's just say, received ethical clearance, if it's applicable, then we move on to the next step, which would be my experimental process, and in my experimental, what exactly will I need? So if we think about it in terms of that, in terms of pure planning, it makes sense because if we are in the lab, I think about myself. When I was in the lab, sometimes the reagents that we need will take a few months in order to come. So if we have a clear plan at the beginning, we understand these are the items that we need. We can order them, or your supervisor can order them early. And obviously, at the end of the day, we want to complete our degree in the shortest amount of time possible, while still simultaneously handing in the highest quality of work that we can. So in terms of the importance of a research proposal, there's a few points here, but I think first I'd like to say, without a proposal, your project can easily lose direction. And for many of us, we know this is true. Especially if you're switching, you come up to a PhD, and if you have to switch your project midway through your degree, it's easy for you to lose direction. By developing a good research proposal, it also signals your preparedness to undertake the study to the university. Each of us here are lucky enough, when we are studying, obviously, we're lucky enough to have a position or a place at this university. And we need to show that, we are actually taking this seriously, that we understand where we're going, we understand the direction the study is going. So that is why it signals your preparedness to university. As an example, if any of us are in the lab, before we start lab work, we must be able to show what are some of the experiments that we hope to conduct, what are the procedural steps in order for us to achieve our aims, and what are some of the anticipated challenges that's associated with that as well. So, many of us will look at a research proposal and we'll be like, it's just another thing that we have to do. But I think if we can shift our perspective to, this is actually meant to help us, not hinder us, it will actually help us to progress a lot better. So a research proposal, moving back to the slides, we understand that it helps us to structure our thinking. And, when it comes to putting one of these proposals together, we are expected to read so widely. Sometimes we could have 100 different thoughts, all around your topic. And, I want to do A, I want to do B, I want to do C. But I think being able to structure your thinking is very important because it allows you to plan the most efficient pathway for you to reach the aims of your study. It also provides a guide for your entire project, and this is something that we have mentioned previously. It allows you to communicate your plan to your supervisors as well as your funders. Now, when it comes to this, I understand that many of us, when we join into a university, our supervisors generally, and from my experience, they have potential projects which have been generally outlined as it is. But obviously, in communication with your supervisor, you can always choose to maybe add something on. But obviously, that would be a discussion that happens between you and your supervisor, taking into account, the feasibility in terms of time as well as cost. And obviously, a research proposal will be required for ethical clearance as well as academic progress. So in terms of ethical clearance, if you are, let's just say, working with animal subjects, you would have to apply for ethics the same way you would have to apply when it comes to humans. And having this proposal actually allows the ethics board to critically evaluate your study and, judge it on its merit. So in terms of proposal writing, we said there's three main phases, that has been identified. The first one's going to be the pre-writing phase, and this is sometimes can be one of the most challenging phases because you're starting from a blank canvas. So in this phase here, what we're dealing with generally is going to be everything ranging from brainstorming. What are some potential analysis? What are some potential experiments? What direction do I want this study to go in? Defining your topic, as well as identifying your audience as well as your deadlines. And I think it's always important for us to keep in mind when it comes to writing, we don't have as much time as we think we do. I'm guilty of this, where if I know I have to write a thesis, excuse me, I will say, oh no, you know what? 2 months is fine or 3 months is fine, because that's what we tell ourselves. But when you come down to it, you understand the amount of work that goes into writing, even just a few pages, is absolutely immense. So I think having a deadline and working backwards from that is always a good thing. It allows us to plan properly. It prevents us from being put under pressure. And obviously, it allows us to, at the end of the day, submit a piece of writing which is of higher quality. So following the pre-writing phase, we go into the writing phase. And this basically is where you will draft each section. And here is where we need to focus on clarity as well as alignment. So in our proposal, we need to make sure that the content that we're adding actually aligns and corresponds well, correlates well with the actual topic, with our research questions, aims, and objectives. And that is something that we will speak a little later on in this presentation. And then the last phase is going to be the post-writing phase. And this is where we're basically going to review it for logic, flow, what are some of the formatting, as well as, taking the comments that we get from our supervisors, maybe even, if there's senior members in your lab as well, and integrating that to improve our overall proposal. I think an important point that I'd like to highlight here is that your proposal writing is going to be iterative, meaning, your first draft is not going to be perfect. And, I can say for many of us, our first drafts are never going to be perfect, but I think it's important for us to have the content down. So my general advice to students when it comes to putting together either a thesis, a journal article, a proposal, will be when you're sitting down with your topic, when you've got these papers open around you, I would suggest you just write, as in you get your thoughts down on papers. And even if it doesn't sound good, even if you need to work on how sentence construction or construction of your paragraph, that's fine, but you need to have your ideas down. And once you have it down, that is where the refining comes in afterwards. Once you have your main ideas down, you expand on them, you reference, then you can go and fine tune after that. Because when we're trying to make our first draft absolutely perfect, we want to obviously make a good impression to our supervisor. It sometimes can result in us actually being having much less time. It takes up a lot of time. So I think in terms of the pre-writing phase, it's actually going to help you to sharpen your question. This comes in with your brainstorming and you're defining your topic. So obviously we want it to be very specific, the area that's going to be under study. The writing phase is actually where you're going to add meat onto your actual proposal. So this is going to build on, build the framework and expand on it as well. As well as in your post writing, we understand that here is where your refinement comes in, and this can be everything from peer review of, from your supervisor. This is where you'll do, maybe some more technical grammar check, sentence construction, as well as ensuring that your argument is coherent and concise. Now, writing a proposal, I treat it the same way as writing any academic document would be. When we're writing, we want to make it sound as let's say, for lack of a better word, as complex as possible. We want to make sure and, show that the study that we're doing is actually something that's not, it has some substance to it. But I think the way in which we write, and this leads into academic writing, would be, we need to ensure that even though we have to write in a formal manner, the language that we use has to be formal, there is structure. We need to find a balance between academic writing, which is formal, as well as academic writing, which even people who are not from our field will be able to understand. Because in my personal opinion, that is one of the, I feel in terms of academic writing, we want our research, we want our proposals to be understood by as many people as possible, because research is not meant to just sit in a shelf and only be accessible to a small percentage of the population. But that's just a personal opinion of mine. Okay, so we're going to go a bit into the pre-writing phase. This is when you're getting started. And I'd maybe just like to take 10 seconds to say, if there's anyone with any questions, please feel free to, put your hand up. Or alternatively, if that's not working for you, please feel free to unmute your mic and just jump in at any time. I really like to turn this more into a discussion where possible. So in your pre-writing phase, it's important for you to clarify your expectations. What exactly is being asked and who is going to be reviewing this, because obviously when it comes to us writing any academic document, we have to keep the audience in mind as well. So we will always stick to the guidelines provided by UJ. We will always, take in the comments that is from our supervisor, but this is the time where we are able to start to, put a bit of ourselves into the study as well. We need to, like I said, define our deadlines as well as plan backwards. So if, for example, we know that our proposal needs to be done in 6 months, when you start off, you'll be like, oh, 6 months is more than enough time for me to get this proposal done. But I would strongly suggest that you actually define your deadline, maybe move a week even before that, just to give yourself a bit of a cushion in case, life happens sometimes. And then you plan out, okay, this section should take me 2 weeks. This literature review should take me a month, whatever it may be, because I do understand some of us also are, involved in coursework as well. So maybe you're involved in teaching, maybe you're involved in some other aspect which is taking up some of your time. So, giving yourself a bit of that buffer is always going to be of benefit. So like we said, start with brainstorming. And this I found something to be very, very useful. And, to be honest, some of the best brainstorming that, that I've been a part of actually has been just in conversation with my lab mates. Reason being is because, you can bounce ideas off each other, you can get their opinions and stuff, you will see things from different perspectives. And especially when you're with the project, if you're taking this project, let's just say from master's and you're expanding on it in your PhD, we can have some tunnel vision sometimes. So a different perspective, for me, I found it very beneficial over the years. And obviously the people that we're speaking to, we need to make sure that they are on, of a similar mindset in terms of work, etc. And we can actually converse. Then we spoke about free writing, which means that when we're working on our draft, don't try to perfect your first draft. It's just going to take up a lot of time. I'm not saying to write horribly. What I'm saying that when you get these ideas, sometimes it's easy for us to forget it, especially if we are, under pressure. So what you do, you write out your ideas. You either scribble them down or you type them straight in the document. That way, at least, you're fleshing it out at this point. You are essentially, forming your framework. And then in the last part of the pre-writing phase, you're going to conduct your readings, and this is basically to refine your idea. So if we put it into context, right? Let's just say your broad interest is going to be on climate change. Let's link this here to free writing. So free writing will help you to explore specific angles. Maybe there's something you haven't read. Maybe there's a new development in the field. Let's say, example, maybe carbon emissions in informal settlements. Maybe that's an aspect that you actually want to also investigate as another part of your study. Then after, you need to ask yourself, is this actually feasible? And these are questions that you can ask in the beginning, in the early stages. I mean, like, where am I going to collect my data from? If I have, let's just say in a master's, I have 2 years in which to complete my actual experimental work as well as submit my thesis. Am I able to collect the data in enough time? If I'm doing cell work, if it's in vitro work, am I able to get the cells in time? What is the buffering that I'm giving myself? These are questions that we can ask ourselves now, just so for our own planning. And then we can also ask ourselves, if I want to, let's just say I want to, so I'm from a cell culture background, and if I wanted to investigate a certain type of cell, now these cells can take anywhere from, a month to 6 months for them to actually arrive at your lab. So, you know what, do we have the funds for it? Do we have the time for it? Do we have the specific equipment that's actually needed for the study? So these are some questions we can ask ourselves during the pre-writing phase. It's a time to question and critically analyze your actual writing as well, your project as well. So when it comes to conducting exploratory reading, I feel that this is extremely important. Reason being is you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel, meaning that, you know what, you don't have to, some people come up with an idea and you think it's so fantastic, but then you won't have realized, had I just read, this is actually widely available information. So while that's good, it tells you along the right path, but what it can do is save you a lot of time. So read, read as widely as you can. Read the abstracts of journals, articles, conference proceedings, whatever it may be, and try and find your direction as well in terms of where do you want the study. And obviously, as I'll always say, this has to be in line with your supervisors. So always take their advice into strong consideration. So I've added this in here in terms of choosing a research topic, but I do understand that many of us, when we come into, labs here or like the Faculty of Science, many of the projects will already be predefined. And there's many reasons for that as well. I'm sure you can add on to them, but obviously these are discussions that you will have to have with your supervisor as well. So as a general guideline, I'll say when choosing a research topic, maybe you are applying to several different labs, you need to identify a research theme from your discipline or your coursework. So again, I'll use an example. Back at UKZN, we in the School of Biochemistry, what we actually saw was that if I look in the biochem, we had everything ranging from cancer research, diabetes, we had green synthesis, we had everything up until like production of beer. So it's quite varied. So we can identify a particular research theme in our discipline or coursework, and thereafter we narrow it down to a topic. For example, let's just say, I'll always say cancer research, and then a focus research problem. So I will say, effect of anti-cancer drugs on, let's say, cervical cancer patients. That would be like, an area that we're narrowing it down to. And thereafter, we need to go on to check for relevance. Does it actually align with, obviously, the department? Originality is something that is a big thing when it comes to your PhD study. And once again, we lean into feasibility. So we look at an example. If you are in molecular biology, for example, instead of studying gene editing, which is a broad theme, right? I mean, there's various different ways to edit genes. You can narrow it down to a specific technique. So CRISPR, for example. So instead of just saying gene editing is my area of study, you can say CRISPR-mediated resistance to maize crops, as an example. So I think it's always important for us to ask ourselves, is there a real world problem? Is there a gap in the research, or is there a technological opportunity here? And I think this is something which is a question that we should be asking ourselves as well. Okay, so this will not apply to everyone. It will just depend on the type of study that you're doing. So I've seen it a lot in terms of other faculties where they're doing surveys. They will have to get some sort of ethics approved. But let's just say you require ethics approval because you are working with animals. You're doing testing on animals, right? Excuse me. So in this case here, what you will have to do, there will be certain documentation that you will have to follow through, and obviously this will be sent. You will get the templates from the ethics committee, and thereafter you will have to fill it in. Obviously, your supervisor generally will assist you with this. We do understand that all research proposals must receive ethical clearance from the faculty academic ethics committee. This is especially if you're working on animal subjects, maybe you're doing interviews, that kind of stuff. If your research involves human or animal subjects, you need to obtain ethics approval from the relevant ethics committee, and there will be specific committees, but your supervisors will be the best position to actually answer, because they, more likely than not, they would have actually have to deal with these ethics committees with previous students. So after going through the process, which actually can be quite an intense process in terms of the requirements, the documentation that is required, thereafter you submit, and then you await feedback from the ethics committee. And Once you submit the completed ethics application forms along with your research proposal, so obviously we see this is one of the reasons why your research proposal needs to be of a good quality as well as have substance to it, as well as any other required attachments or appendices. Then you wait feedback basically, and you can only begin your actual, if you require, let's just say, ethical clearance for a particular aspect of your study, you cannot start that until you have received ethical clearance. So just something to consider as well and place into your timeline. Okay, so in terms of the writing phase, we're going to move on to drafting your proposal. So I always feel, it's important for you to obviously start with your content. And how do we go about doing this? You start off by organizing your ideas into your headings. How do you want this to flow exactly? I think this leads in heavily into your literature review. If you have a direction, where I'm going with this literature review, thereafter finding the relevant papers actually becomes a lot easier. So spending a bit more time, with brainstorming, formulating your actual framework, it saves you a lot of time in the long run. Then we go on to, you need to prioritize clarity and accuracy over language perfection. And this is something that we've mentioned, I think, 2 or 3 times already in this presentation. So be clear in the way that you're speaking. Ensure that there's a logical flow in terms of your ideas, in terms of, me as a reader who may not have, probably will not have as much experience in that field. I can understand your train of thought. I always think of academic writing as being it's like a conversation, but when you're writing, it's a conversation where you are leading and the reader is actually passive. So you need to ensure that you are guiding the reader successfully through this journey, that they can understand your train of thought. You need to build each section logically from your objectives. And like we said, don't worry about elegant writing on your first draft. Just get it done, ensure that it is of a good standard, and thereafter you can work on obviously refining later on. I think it's important for us to focus on substance here. Are our aims, is the aim of the study actually clear? Am I able to achieve this method? Am I able to do it in the amount of time that's available to me? Do we have the resources to do it? As well as move from your rough structure to a more polished document. And we say here in layers, meaning that every draft that you get, when you get more and more feedback, you'll see how this proposal starts to actually evolve, and it becomes of a better quality as well. Okay, and then this is the phase where it can also take a lot of time, and that's why we need to give ourselves, we can't just say, oh, you know what, for the post-write revising and refining, I'm going to take 2 days for this. I've had 6 months. For whatever reason, I've only left myself 2 days for the revising and refining phase. So I think allocate yourself enough time when it comes to these sections. So what I think is good would be to read aloud your proposal, your writing, to check for the flow and clarity. Sometimes when we're reading it and we've been working on a document for months at a time, it's easy for us to make mistakes. Easier for us to oversee, certain errors. So by reading it aloud, we are obviously able to hear ourselves, and then we can see, this actually doesn't flow very well. The progression from point A to point B is not clear, or maybe I can improve my clarity in this area. And that's how we go about refining our proposal. And then as we do this here, we're also able to identify, where am I repeating certain terms? Am I using the same word to start 3 consecutive sentences? Am I starting 3 consecutive sentences in the same way? You can say, this study aims, this study hopes. Am I doing the same thing over and over? Is there jargon there that is not adding to my actual study? It's not necessary, and this is something that you obviously would have to speak with your supervisor on. At this stage here, we also need to ensure that our referencing style is consistent, and this can be everything from APA to Harvard. It'll depend on your specific department as well. And something that's important is for us to ask for feedback. I mean, when I think about how I used to view feedback, I thought it as, someone is critiquing me, and I used to take it personally. And then you have all these conversations with yourselves, how could I make this mistake? How could I write this? But at the end of the day, we each learn from each other. No one is perfect, and I stand by that. So when we get this feedback, look at it as, this person is actually trying to assist me to be better because I don't plan on making the same mistakes in, a subsequent drafts, shall we say. So always seek feedback from your peers, always seek feedback from your supervisors. But at the end of the day, remember, what your supervisor says, I strongly suggest that you go with it. And if there is, something that maybe there's misalignment, they just have a conversation and they'll be able to explain, because generally our supervisors have got an overarching view. They see things that we don't. So there may be reasons that they're asking us to perform a certain study, something we may not be aware of. Okay. So in terms of our proposal format, I think it's important for us to understand that each component will serve a purpose. And we're going to go into this in a bit more detail, right? So let's look at your title, your keywords, pretty self-explanatory. We need to be clear. So if someone is searching for a particular thesis or a research area, what our thesis or journal article comes up. Now, obviously, this lays into it needs to be aligned in the proposal. So your title and your keywords needs to be precise. It needs to also reflect the scope of the study. Your background and rationale should discuss why you've chosen this topic. Why is it important? What's missing in the field? A rationale for the study is, this is the background. Let's say climate change in South Africa is a major problem. Then you provide some evidence for that. And then you go on to say, based off this evidence, based off what are some of the harmful effects that we're seeing, that is why we think the study will actually be of benefit, because it allows us to, maybe look at the problem from a different perspective. It allows us to maybe, it will shed new insights on how we can make certain changes. Then we go on to our research aims and objectives. And I think these are important. Obviously, everything in your proposal is important, but these need to be clear. You need to be able to measure them, and you need to make sure that they are aligned with your topic. Then in your literature review, moving on to there, we need to see that, it is analytical. We are critically analyzing the the literature which is currently available within the field. And a literature review is not necessarily where you give your own insights. You basically collecting data, you're collecting literature from a particular topic and you're presenting it and using this to actually strengthen, your argument, either for research gap, etc. Then we'll go on to, what is your research problem or your hypothesis, and these need to be concise as well as it needs to be researchable. So sometimes when we have this extremely new, these, let's just say very niche areas of study, finding papers would actually be quite difficult. So, these are things to take into consideration. Then we have methodology and design. In this regard here, we understand, this is going to involve what are the steps? How am I going to achieve this? What is the experiments I'm going to perform? What are some of the tools? Am I going to use controls? If so, what type of controls? What analysis am I going to perform on this particular data that I'm getting? Then we've mentioned the ethics statements, which will basically be listing your protocols as well as getting permissions, and timeline and budget, which basically means, am I able to achieve the study within the next year and a half with the funds that is allocated to me? Because each of us can go and look and develop a wonderful proposal, but if we don't have, if our research group is unable to obviously spend that amount of money on one particular study, that study becomes unfeasible. And then obviously we'll also have a chapter outline as well as including our references, which is very important as well. So just to go back as well, we said that each component actually serves a purpose. We understand that the literature review actually will support your rationale, right? The methodology is going to show how exactly am I going to achieve my aims. We need to be specific, right? So here we can mention specific models that we're using. What are the instruments, or what is this given population that's going to be under study? Try and provide as much detail and provide a good roadmap for yourself. So I wanted to put this in here. I know many of us would already have a good understanding of research aims and objectives, but I just want to go through it in case, just as a safety. So let's look at research aim. So the research aim is essentially your destination. Where do you hope to be, right? It gives your project direction. We need to think of it as a headline of your investigation. It's not about the how or the methods or how exactly you're going to achieve this or what the data is yet. It's about, why you are conducting the study in the first place. Um, and then we're going to go back to climate change or climate modeling, right? So if you're studying climate modeling, your aim might be to, let's just say, evaluate the accuracy of satellite-based precipitation estimates in forecasting severe weather events in Southern Africa, right? So we need to make sure that our aim is actually aligned to our field. So in this case, here it'll be environmental science. It is focused on contribution and not just activity. And it is also framed in a language that is accessible to people who are reading it. It's important for us to avoid multiple aims unless your supervisor or your program actually instructs you to do this here. But I think that'll be under quite specific circumstances. It's important for us to keep it clear, purposeful, as well as achievable. So, like we said, the aim defines the overall purpose of the study. It is a broad, general statement of what you intend to achieve. And I think it's important for us to frame it in the way of saying this study aims to, or the primary aim is, use the word aim in it because obviously it allows people to easily identify it. And it should align with the research problem and guide all other proposal components. So like we said, we need to make sure that it is aligned to our field, it's focused on contribution, as well as it's framed in a language which is accessible to reviewers, examiners, and people who are reading it. In terms of our research objectives and research questions, your research objectives will actually break down the aim into specific actionable goals. So by achieving these objectives, you'll be able to better answer the aim of your study. In this sort of phase, we use verbs like identify, compare, evaluate, quantify, assess. And we need to make sure that our objectives actually use the SMART format. And as we got it up on the screen here, we can see SMART basically stands for they need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be achievable, they need to be relevant, and they need to be time bound. Obviously, meaning that within the next 6 months, we should be able to have collected this amount of data, you put a time limit on it. In terms of research questions, these basically provide focus of your study. They should always be clear, concise, and answerable through research. And usually we stick to around 1 to 3 questions, but this may vary from department to department. And then there's a possibility of having sub questions as well. And this will just be if they are needed, right? So your objectives are essentially your roadmap, basically the steps you're going to take to reach your aim. And obviously the research questions will provide basically what is the focus of your study. So something that many people, is a very important section of your thesis or your proposal, but something that takes a lot of time and effort is going to be a literature review. So I think when it comes to writing a strong literature review, some general guidelines would always be to use peer-reviewed sources. I mean, when we come in at honors level or even sometimes in masters, this may not be just abundantly clear, because for us, let's just say the average undergraduate from my time, if it was on the internet, it must be true. So we need to make sure the sources we're using are peer reviewed. This basically just adds to the credibility of the material that you are speaking about, and then use up-to-date sources. So this will vary from department to department. Generally, in my experience, I've tried to use papers within the past 5 years. Reason being for this is that we understand that science actually moves, new things are being discovered on a daily basis. And we want to make sure that the theories that we're referencing, etc., are still hold water today. So when it comes to, let's just say your study is based on a central theory which was developed 20 years ago. Now, obviously, it does not make sense for you to find a recent reference when the theory was developed 20 years ago. So in that case, you will go back to the original source. But if there are supporting references that you would require, then I would say go as recent as possible. So within the past 5 years, 5 to 10 years. But these are questions that you can speak to your supervisor and see what they're comfortable with as well. So we'd also like to structure around themes or debates and not just authors, So how we think of a literature review is you start off very broadly. So if I think about, one of my literature reviews, it would be I would speak about disease. My end goal is cervical cancer, but I'll start talking about disease. Um, then I'll move on to let's just say cancer as a broad theme. Then I would go on to from cancer, I would go on to, let's just say, different types of approaches to treating these cancers. Then I would go down specifically to cervical cancer and I'll go to specific approaches that people use. So basically, you think of your literature review as being sort of like a funnel. You start off discussing broadly on your theme, and then you work your way down strategically up until a point which is your actual research area, the area that's being studied. It's important for us to list studies avoid listing studies without critique, identify the gaps as well as frame your contribution. When it comes to your literature review, like I said previously, and this point can be a bit confusing, but we need to summarize and provide a good account of what the literature is actually saying on this particular topic. This is not the point where you add in your insights necessarily, but you can use it. You can say, according to a study by Josiah et al. Or Monera et al., this is what their findings were. Then below that, you can say, you know what, this actually links up to some of the other literature that we found. So that's how you put in your contribution in there. And then we've got to link it to your conceptual framework. So essentially meaning that, your literature review needs to have a bit of direction. It needs to align well with what you actually are trying to achieve as well. So if at the end of the day, your research is focused around the development of a delivery vehicle for specific medications, then you understand that your literature review needs to touch on maybe some other widely available delivery vehicles. What are their limitations, and then you paint a picture as to why what you are studying is actually important, because it's trying to answer a question to something which has not been answered currently. So if we have, if you take, for example, if you are researching let's just say a vaccine, let's just say you're researching a vaccine that is specific to individuals in South Africa. So instead of just saying, let's just say Monera et al. Stated, you can say, you can frame it to be something along the lines of, studies in sub-Saharan Africa emphasize A, B, and C. However, they lack quantitative data to actually correlate on this particular topic, something like that there. So I hope that is clear. Okay, so we're moving on to the research problem, and we'll try and not take up too much more of your time. So when it comes to your research problem, generally you're going to have a central question which is going to be driving the study. If it comes to climate change, you're going to say the research problem is, let's just say we have within South Africa, there's been drastic weather changes, and we can link this to the research problem would be linked to the fact that, there is drastic climate events which have been happening over the past 10 years, which had not happened previously. So we're framing it in a way, this is the problem and what is the aim of the research, therefore, and the objectives are going to help us to, let's just say, achieve the aim. So your research problem, once again, like everything, your proposal needs to be specific, it needs to be significant, it needs to be testable, and it needs to be distinct from your aims and objectives. Remember, the research problem, you've identified a problem, and now you want to perform the study to basically address the problem. The aim is basically what the aim of your study is. It's going to give you an answer, and the objectives is the way in which you're going to achieve your aim. You're going to measure, have I actually achieved my aim? And obviously, research problem will form the foundation of the hypothesis as well as the method that you're going to use. I think it's important for us to outline here that a weak problem will lead to an unfocused project. A strong one, on the other hand, is grounded in evidence and has clear boundaries. Example, is there insufficient data? let's just say, insufficient data on the levels of bacteria that are occurring in tap water in KwaZulu-Natal. So you need to have a let's just say a strong research problem. So in order to address those issues. So in terms of research design and methodology, obviously many of this would be provided, the main methods will be provided by or dictated by your research group. So in this case here, you will have to explain your design type. Is it going to be experimental, quantitative, etc. You're going to have to describe your data sources. Am I going to collect data from field work? Is it going to be from secondary data sets? Is it going to be from lab experiments? What type of analysis am I going to perform on this data that I am actually acquiring? Example of which, am I going to use statistical tests? What software am I going to use? Is it going to be SPSS? Is it going to be, R? Is it going to be something along those lines? And we need to be able to justify the decisions that we're making. Why exactly are we using this particular method? Why are we using this experimental protocol? And here as well, we need to address feasibility as well as limitations. This we've already mentioned, but just to highlight once again, in terms of your ethics statements, you need to declare your ethical risks and how you're going to address them. Include data protection, especially if you are collecting personal information. The POPIA Act comes into play, so you need to have things like consent procedures, debriefing if there are certain topics that you're speaking on. If let's just say you're interviewing, there was a colleague of mine that was actually interviewing cancer, people had been through cancer treatments, and lots of these people were in remission. And now by you going and bringing up these topics, you can actually it can affect them, obviously, because they've been through a traumatic experience. So debriefing afterwards as well is very important. You need to obviously look at the requirements set out by UJ in the guidelines, as well as you put your timeline together for ethics application as well as clearance. I briefly want to touch on timeline and budget. Maybe not so much budget, but more the timeline. So include the time for your ethics, your pilot testing, data collection, your analysis, your writing. Put all of this down in your plan. Even if you don't have to include in your proposal, it gives you a good plan in terms of, how am I going to get through the next 2 years or 3 years or 4 years of my life in terms of achieving this study. Your budget must also be realistic. Sometimes we think our supervisors have got unlimited research funds, but we know that's not the case. So, have these discussions with your supervisors in terms of what lab materials will you need? Are there transports or incentives? Are there other sorts of costs that's going to be required? So, other types of analysis that maybe you can't do yourself. So maybe with that there, it will be allows you to plan better as well. In terms of your chapter outline, this is going to provide basically a structure of your final thesis or your dissertation. So in chapter 1 is going to be my introduction, chapter 2 is going to be a literature review, chapter 3, 4, and 5 will be my research chapters, and chapter 6 will actually be my conclusion. Depending on how you actually going to be structured. So if you're structuring in the paper format, that would be the way. If you are structuring in a different format, more traditional, it'll be, maybe 1 and 2 remains the same in being your introduction, your literature review, whereas the subsequent chapters will deal with everything from methods and material, results, discussion, conclusion, etc. And then reflect your alignment with the objectives and the methods. I think this is obviously, us for always doing our checks and balances throughout the proposal. So specifically when dealing with, if you're putting together a proposal for a PhD, we need to make sure that, we make an original contribution that we are adding to the field. So we need to go beyond replication. We need to generate new insights or new models. And we need to fill gaps or challenge assumptions in the literature. I think this is very important, So we can either use novel methods or data sets. And at the end of the day, we need to contribute to knowledge, to new theory, or to new practice as well. So I think when it comes to, when we're trying to look for originality and novelty in a PhD study, it can be anything from, this is a completely new area, no one has looked at it from this perspective, to, I am actually going to optimize this particular synthesis method or this protocol to allow for more reliable results. Originality and novelty actually is something you will discuss with your supervisor. In terms of writing style and confidence, so I'm going to focus more on the writing style here. It is important for us to use clear, formal academic language. There's lots of resources online. Even if you go onto the respective Moodle communities, you will have access to presentations on academic writing. Maybe these are something you can just browse through. But when we are writing, writing it's a balancing act. I say this because it's a balancing act in the terms of we need to be clear, formal, concise, but at the same time, we also have our own unique writing style. We want the information that we're saying to be as widely accessible as possible. So finding that balance between, staying within the bounds of academic writing, but still writing simplistically, that is something we'll develop over time. It's important for us to avoid passive voice and overcomplicated words, overcomplicated terms. And essentially, we will edit for consistency as well as tone, and this will work through each draft. We'll continue to refine as well. So we're going to go on to, and we got a few more slides left in terms of the submission process. And I just want to put a bit of a disclaimer here. These are the general guidelines that we have come across in terms of submitting your proposal. So obviously, departments may have their own specific, shall we say, procedures that they're doing, but generally these are the general guidelines. So there's going to be initial review, meaning that you're going to submit your completed proposal to your department for initial review. So obviously, this is going to be after much consultation with your supervisor. And this step often involves feedback from your supervisor and possibly a departmental review committee. Once you have approval, in some departments, there will be a requirement for an oral presentation of the proposal. And this is required during a department colloquium before your written submission as well. So like we said, it's going to vary from department to department, but I think that, you can have these conversations with your supervisor and they will be able to provide you much more in-depth answers in terms of the specifics of that department. So something which, peek behind the curtain would be the Faculty Higher Degrees Committee, FHDC. After it's been approved by a department, it needs to go to the FHDC. So there will be certain documentation that is required here along with your proposal. So after the departmental approval, we need to submit the signed proposal to the basically FHDC. And then we go to a bit more detail here, which is there's going to be certain registration forms, and they got HDC1, but your supervisor will know this, so that'll be fine. In terms of postgraduate studies, they must accompany all of the proposals. A report from a statistician may also be required by the Higher Degrees Committee, and we need to ensure that all required documents, including any necessary ethics approvals, are included. So at this stage, after it's been reviewed and you receive approval, we need to be mindful of the submission deadline to avoid delays in your research timeline. We need to understand that we all have obviously a defined time in terms of getting this proposal done. So in terms of final tips, what I can say is that always start early. So as soon as you have a supervisor, as long as you have a topic or even a general topic, start reading, start putting down, jotting down ideas, start brainstorming, write regularly, revise often. A proposal, just like a thesis or just like, writing your first journal article can seem like a monumental task. And it does require a lot of work, but you know what? A little work every day actually adds up to big results. That was actually stuck on the door of our lab. Our supervisor put it up there. It's like, you know what? Sometimes you think that, I've already written a paragraph today, but the fact is that you are writing. The fact is that you are reading, and you would be amazed at the end of it how your brain actually retains that information. So be consistent, start early, write regularly, revise often, and this will always be of benefit. One additional tip that I don't have here would be initially when you start writing, let's just say I've been writing since Sunday night, I just started my proposal. So today is Monday. Before I just jump straight into, where I left off, what I found to be quite useful would be you need to basically gear yourself up to the writing phase essentially again. So what I used to do is in that extra half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is, instead of just jumping into the new content, I would go back and I would revise and try to refine certain areas, maybe even certain ideas, maybe not the language, you know. And by doing that, you're only spending about half an hour. But what you're doing is you are priming yourself so that when you do reach a new section, your brain is functioning properly again, you're on the same level, and you're able to actually progress a lot faster. Be specific, in your writing. Don't lean away from flowery language, lean away from, going unnecessarily in depth. You'll have an opportunity to do that later, but for your proposal, be specific, be concise, stick to the structure. Your writing should be structured. Seek feedback at every stage, even if it's not formal feedback, even just in discussion. Maybe you are passing your supervisor in the hallway or you're walking past the office, in that way there you can just stop by, a 2-minute conversation can actually save you hours later on. Or maybe even it's you working more closely with a specific postdoc or PhD student, depending on your level of study. Seek this feedback. Don't try to invent the wheel yourselves. And then obviously follow UJ's guidelines carefully, always be in alignment with um, your department, what the requirements are. And I think if we do that, we would be able to hopefully put together a present proposal, which is going to be of a good standard as well. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you all for your attention. And I'll leave the floor open to any questions or contributions at this stage. But at this stage, I'll actually hand over back to Ms. Josiah. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. David, for that insightful presentation. I think that it has really helped myself and everybody in the session. I'm going to open the floor up to questions, comments, suggestions. Maybe you're not clear on something and you would like Dr. David to go over that aspect. I think now is the time. I have enabled all mics. Yes, Kwaka, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much. And thanks again, Dr. David, for the presentation. My question is around the ethics application and approval. So my study has two parts. There's on-site environmental data collection that I need to do. And then there's also a questionnaire that I need to conduct with residents in the area. I take it my ethics is applicable only for part 2, right? So am I able to still go on site and do environmental monitoring without the questionnaire ethics while I wait for that to come through?
That is a good question. And I think that is a good question. I think that if I'm not mistaken, your ethics is actually going to be, you need ethics for your project. So even though what you're saying you can go and collect, I'm not sure how the ethics board would actually, because your project hasn't been approved necessarily. I do understand that it makes sense. And obviously your ethics is specific to the questionnaire that you're filling out. So I think that would be more of a specific question that you will have to ask your supervisor. I think Dr. Gabriel's got his hand up here. Dr. Gabriel, if you want to jump.
Thank you, Doc. I just want to appreciate your presentation. I think we have learned a lot of insights that we have received from this conversation that you had with us. And also, I always join to try to see the sort of similarities and differences, from a science perspective, natural science and social science. And I'm really happy that I think there are a lot of quite a number of elements that we share in common. I've been listening to what you were saying and following throughout the whole presentation. I just want to go to the back to the question of Kwakwa. Okay, when you applied for the ethical clearance, did you apply for the project or you applied individually, depending on the sort of research design that you are following?
It's specifically just for the questionnaire part of things.
Okay, well, I would think that maybe if there's nothing that sort of traverse across the two, in terms of, I understand one part is a quantitative aspect, then the other one is for a qualitative, um, for the qualitative design. So if it doesn't traverse across, then if you receive if the ethical clearance are being issued in terms of the research design that you are following. So if you have the one for the qualitative part where I understand you want to do observation, if I heard you well, then I'm sure you are able to go to proceed with that part. But you don't have to, that when you have received for the qualitative part, then you go and use that as well on the quantitative side.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah.
Dr.
So I'm thinking it's you can be able to go and proceed with data collection for that particular aspect of the research design. Then when
Okay.
you
Yeah.
get the one for the quantitative side, then you can now go and proceed with the quantitative part.
No, thank
All
you
right.
for that, Dr. Gabriel.
Thank you.
I think yeah,
Alright, Doc.
I think that makes sense. If you have applied obviously specifically for your questionnaire, then that would make sense. It should not prevent you from completing the other ends of your study. Sometimes if you're I'm thinking about for previous, there was a colleague of mine who actually needed ethical clearance, but they applied for the entire study because the entire study was formulated around testing of a commonly, let's just say, a commonly available drug on particular mouse models, whatever it was. So in that case there, then it would be different. But yeah, I think Dr. Gabriel's answered your question very nicely. Thank you, Doc. Uh, any other questions or any other, please feel free to either put your hand up or type a question in the chat. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Dr. Gabriel. So, like Dr. David said, if anybody has any other questions, comments, or you are unclear about something in the presentation, now is your opportunity. Okay, Dr. David, from my side, I just wanted to understand approximately what is the length of a proposal in master's versus PhD? Is
Mhm.
that specific to your supervisor, or how does it work?
Well, so I'm just going to answer this question based off what I've seen in terms of assisting students with their proposals. What I've noticed is that the number of pages is actually going to vary between departments, and I think it's more along the lines of what you've discussed with your supervisor. Um, So obviously, certain supervisors, from what I've seen, they require much more in detail literature review in your proposal compared to others. So I think the length should not be too much varied between masters and PhD. I think just the level of detail that you are adding at each of these levels is obviously going to be a bit more different. With PhD, you expect it to be a bit more specific, but at the end of the day, the general requirements for your proposal would be outlined in terms of the template that they provide for you as well. So I hope that answers your question, Mr. Josiah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And is there any other questions or comments? Okay, I think while we're still thinking about questions, don't forget to fill in the feedback survey. I've put it in the chat. Also, I just wanted to ask from the RCD side, If there is a topic that you would like the RCD to cover, if you have looked at our schedules, our workshop schedules, and you haven't seen a specific topic that you may want to be discussed or explored, you can kindly email us at rcdinquiries@uj.ac.za and we will fit in that workshop. Or alternatively, you can type it here in the chat or unmute your mic and let me know, what topics you all would like explored in the future, and we will discuss with the team and get back to you. And we're just waiting for any other questions or comments that you may have.
I think there's a student typing in the. Oh, there we go. There's a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Laurent, I also want to know about how many words are expected for the master's dissertation.
That is a question we get asked about quite often. And to be honest with you, I have not come across someone who says you need to have 10,000 words or 20,000 words for a dissertation. I think when it comes to your thesis, generally you're going to be judged, and this is from my own view and from my own experience. When it comes to your master's thesis, for example, what they're looking at is do you have enough content? Are you explaining the concepts clearly? Is your results being projected correctly? Do you have good results? So I think those are actually going to be the focus. But to put it into context, and this is just again from my personal experience, you will have to speak to your supervisor. The reason why I keep saying this is because each of the departments is going to have their own unique requirements. So I'll just give you a general guideline. When I was in master's, I think my master's thesis, excluding references, was around like 120 pages. And when I went to PhD, I think including references, it was about like 200 and between 200 and 250. So I think work on those page limits. But again, these are things that you can discuss with your specific supervisor. But let me just put a disclaimer here and say, from all the supervisors that I've spoken to, what they focus on is the content. Is it presented well? Is your literature review comprehensive enough? Are you discussing your results in enough detail? Are you providing your own insights? These are the key aspects that you should be focusing on, not necessarily the number of words. But yeah, I think these are conversations that you should have and you can have. You'll get better answers from with your supervisor. Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't be of more help, but I'm trying to be a bit more general in my answers because it will vary from department to department. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. David. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? All right. Okay, if you feel like you can't think of a question right now and maybe later today or tomorrow, there's something that's on your mind and you want to find out about it, you can also just email us at RCD Inquiries and we will respond to your query. Okay, in the absence of questions, I'm going to bring this workshop to a close. I just want to thank you for your time and supporting the RCD unit. We really do appreciate it, and we hope to see you in the future. For our future workshops, I think it will be highly beneficial. We want to remind all students that during your postgraduate journey, you are not alone. That is why we are here. The RCD is here for every step of the journey, and we're here to support you and to guide you as best we can. To our presenter or facilitator, Dr. David, I just want to express our appreciation and gratitude and towards you and thanking you for supporting the RCD unit. We really do appreciate it. And with that, I just want to bring this to a close and have a lovely afternoon further.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.